The fourth thing that can limit God's power in our life is pride and self-reliance. How many of you know someone who is proud? Someone who is proud. Don't look at your neighbor, look at me, okay? How many of you know someone who is proud? They rely on themselves. Pride and self-reliance are other ways we can limit God and His power in our lives. When we trust in our own abilities and resources more than in God, we are essentially limiting what God can do through us. When we depend on ourselves instead of depending on Him. The story of King Nebuchadnezzar in the 4th chapter of Daniel serves as a powerful example of how pride can limit God's work. Nebuchadnezzar was a mighty king who credited his success to his own strength and wisdom. He says, I'm mighty because of me. I am successful because of me. I am all of this because of me. But God humbled him by driving him into madness until he acknowledged God's sovereignty. God caused Nebuchadnezzar to lose his mind because of pride. I'm not saying that proud people are going to lose their minds. God can choose to humble them other ways as well. But Nebuchadnezzar lost his mind. Nebuchadnezzar's pride limited his ability to recognize God's hand in his life. And it was only through humbling himself that he could experience God's power and restoration. In Luke 18, 9 through 14, Jesus told the story of a self-righteous Pharisee and a tax collector who were in the temple praying. The Pharisee was full of himself. Like Nebuchadnezzar, he was very proud. The tax collector was humble before God, and he acknowledged his sin. The Pharisee's prideful attitude blinded him to his need for grace, while the tax collector's humility opened the door for God's mercy to flow in. Jesus concludes the parable by saying, everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Pride limits our ability to receive God's grace because it creates a false sense of self-sufficiency. Pride creates a false sense of self-sufficiency. Pride and self-reliance keep us from seeking God's help and guidance. There's very little room for God to work when we are full of ourselves. Think about that. There's very little room for God to do things in our lives when we are full of ourselves. The Bible calls us to humble ourselves under God's mighty hand so that He may lift us up at the appointed time. See 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 6. A true event happened a number of years ago. A small airplane took off by itself without a pilot. Somehow it had been left in gear, and it just taxied down the runway and took off. This is a true story. It went 90 miles and then crashed. It took off on its own, flew for 90 miles, and then something happened and it hit the earth. Without God, you can take off for a while. Without God, you can go high for a while. Without God, you can get your own name for a while. Or you can build something that is great for a while. But there's coming a time when you're going to run out of fuel. When you run out of fuel, that landing is going to be hard. So before you take off, make sure God is in charge. Before you take off, make sure God is calling the shots. Before you take off, make sure you have submitted to God, so that when you take off, you keep flying and do not crash. Psalms 127 verse 1 reads, unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain who build it. Unless the Lord guards the city, the watchman stays awake in vain. Unless God is in control, it's for nothing. This stretches into your personal life, your academic life, whatever area that is important to you. If God is not in control, it is for nothing. It will come to nothing the way this world will come to nothing. Because this world is going to be burnt up. This world is going to be recreated. I just think of so many people who put so much effort into earth-based things, earth-based efforts, and this earth is going to be washed away.